Good morning. It's really a pleasure to see you all here today. As we are waiting for more participants to join, I just want to welcome everyone and say hello. Maybe we can wait a couple of more seconds and then we start.
Very quick question. Is your battery fully charged? Because you are now using my charger, which we changed beforehand.
It is fully charged.
I will use the charger. Those are the minor things.
So I think we can start now. Good morning again, dear participants, dear audience, dear panel. My name is Mira Sulimenova. I'm the legal counsel at Gentis. Gentis is a Viennese startup that developed a server-side tracking solution that is increasing the quality of data and helping you to become compliant with the GDPR and other data protection regulations. Today we want to talk about the recent decision of the Denmark Data Protection Authority about Google Analytics. We would like to discuss the impact of this decision and how it fits into the bigger picture. We also want to talk about the effective strategies of implementing the compliance in view of this decision and many more to come. Today we have only 60 minutes for this webinar and the time goes very fast, especially when we dive into the topic and start discussing the peculiarities of these decisions and the impact. So to make use of this time, I ask you, dear audience, to post your questions during the webinar in the chat box, and we will try to address as many of them during the webinar. We will also have 10 minutes at the end of the webinar to do a Q&A section or Q&A session and answer any remaining questions. So now that I'm done with all the formalities, I'm really happy to introduce our guests, Aurelie Pols, Ulrich Sandholt, and of course, Klaus Müller. I will start with Aurelie. Aurelie is a board member of the European Center for Privacy and Cybersecurity, a visiting fellow of Maastricht University, a board member of H2020 project, Panelift, and an expert group member of the EU Observatory of the Online Platform Economy. That is an initiative of European Commission. You can talk to Aurelie about privacy enhancing technology, about privacy engineering and data protection at large on the European level. Ulrich is the Chief Innovation Officer at Adcore, a leading Danish digital consultancy that helps companies deliver customer-centric and data-driven digital marketing at scale. Ulrich helps a broad selection of large Danish and international companies decide how they should use data and technology in their communication and how to approach privacy in the cookieless future. Last but not least, Klaus is our co-founder and co-CEO of Gentis. He is a serial entrepreneur, a very experienced businessman, and he has a long-standing experience in ad tech industry. He worked as the corporate manager for companies like Google, T-Mobile, and Hutchison, and now is shaping the future of data privacy with Gentis. So let me very briefly explain the background of today's session. And it starts in December 2021 when the Austrian Data Protection Authority issued a decision ruling that Google Analytics standard contractual clauses are not compliant with the GDPR. It was followed by the decision of the French Data Protection Authority that confirmed that the standard contractual clauses of Google Analytics cannot be used in order to afford compliance. Then there was the Italian Data Protection Authority also saying the same thing. And now we have the fourth authority in Europe confirming and making it more detailed in explanation of why Google Analytics, although they made a lot of changes to the existing documentation, is nonetheless not yet compliant.
Just a quick one. Ulrich, I'm not sure, can you mute yourself and Aurélie if you're not speaking, because then we do not get a signal. Thank you.
So today we want to talk about what happened in Denmark and what kind of reactions did we see, what is the decision, what does this decision mean for Google Analytics use in general, and what other tools are there to do the international data transfers, how organizations can employ services and applications from the US companies compliantly. We want to talk about international data transfers in general, because it concerns not only US, but also countries like China, Australia, India, any other third country in the world, and what are the specific implications and recommendations. So let me start with a pulse check, and I would like to ask Ulrich. Ulrich, what has actually happened 2 weeks ago, and what type of reactions did you see from the Danish companies? Ulrich, you are muted.
Thank you. It's a lot easier to speak when you're unmuted. If you can hear me, I'll just continue. But basically, yes. What happened on the 21st of September was that the data privacy authorities issued a statement where they had looked into Google Analytics and the legality of whether to use it in its current configuration, or more likely the most standard configuration there is. And their verdict was that it was not compliant with GDPR, and that in order for you to use it continuously, you have to either use it in a different fashion or find another tool to use to measure user interactions. And really what the key finding of them is that it's all around user identification, meaning that because the tool collects your identification through a cookie ID and an IP address, and that is sent to a US-based server, it is not in compliance with GDPR regulations. So what has to be done is to implement a solution that can change this. And I'm sure you're going to get much more into this in the future. The first reactions that we saw was, of course, all the agencies who all spammed LinkedIn with articles about we know what the solution is and don't worry about it. And then, of course, there's a different category of companies who react. The first category of companies are the companies who already have a server-side solution implemented. They are pretty calm about it because they just have to adjust a few things to make it work. These are usually the big retailers or the ones who are very dependent on data, who are already going in that direction to circumvent cookie lifetimes, expiration dates, and such. Then there are the companies who do not have a server-side platform, but who also have reacted quite strongly, saying, what does this mean for our company? What kind of plan do we have to actually comprise in order to make it work? But that's about what has happened since then. And then there is actually a pretty big swath of companies who've been notified about it and who was asking questions about it, but really hasn't done anything yet. And those companies probably do not realize or are not as dependent on Google Analytics or analytics implementations as other companies, and they probably do not necessarily realize the implications of what it means. So for the last two categories of companies, I think it's very important to make a stance and choose to implement, at least plan an implementation change to your current installation or find another solution altogether. So I think that's basically.
Yeah, thank you, Ulrich. Klaus, I want you to talk about more on how we read this decision and what does it mean in terms of details. What type of details did we read out from this decision?
I think what we have prepared is just something which is publicly available, and what Ulrich just stated is there is public information available online, and if you just click So the Data Protection Authority, Ulrich, can you mute yourself again, please? We just have this click in the line. Thank you for that. So on the website of the Datatilsynet, there is exactly what Ulrich already said, and read it with your own eyes. It's very easy to digest and to read. And so the agency has concluded that the tool cannot, without more, and this will be part of this webinar, used lawfully. And they explicitly say that they have aligned this position within the European association, within the European Data Protection Board. And therefore, it's not just a Danish decision, while it's very important that, of course, they have included all the statements in the meantime, whatever was stated by American companies, by American government, by European Union representatives, and they still come to the same conclusion towards the second half of the year versus was done at the beginning of the year. And they're referring, of course, to the other decisions. And when it comes to how does the solution look like, and don't get us wrong, we really like Google Analytics. I was working many years with Google. We're 5 ex-Googlers here at Gentis. We're not saying stop using Google Analytics, but we want to enable to use Google Analytics in a legal way. And that's exactly what the statement of the Data Protection Authority actually is providing to all of you. It's pseudonymization. So as long as the personal data stays in the European Union and we only share pseudonymized data with the US, with China, with Australia, with India, everything is fine. So the same implication goes for TikTok, for example. We always only talk about Google Analytics because it's the biggest target out there. But it goes without saying that the same is true, and I think Aurélie will also agree with that, and we'll dive a little bit deeper into that, I'm sure. So those are the publicly available informations about the press release. They call it supplementary measure, not exactly a word one of us would use each day, but the lawyers will call it supplementary measure. And to achieve pseudonymization. There are 7+1 criteria to explain how pseudonymization is supposed to be done, and this will be also part of the second part of our session here. You will find Q&A sessions on the website. What also has been different to France and Austria, that all the all the statements are available in English, very well argued, very well described. So if you find the time, please read yourself, but we have highlighted here the most important statements publicly available.
We have now the question from the audience, and maybe it's preceding the presentation that Aurélie has prepared, and I just would like to just leave it here in the discussion round. So one of our members of the audience is asking, does this mean that this law will be applied to more European countries? So I think the question is whether or not this ruling will affect more European companies, whether this is in general an understanding for all of the European data protection authorities.
I would say it's a good question for you, Mira, and for Aurélie, and I would pass it then on to Aurélie that she answers her point of view of that. So just in order to keep with the timing, the Q&A sessions are also available. We have a link here. We will be able to share the presentation with you afterwards, so you will find all the links in there. Those are the points addressed, like, for example, is it okay that you just state in your consent management bar that you will share the data with the US, and the statement here is no, it's not. That's paragraph 49 in GDPR. So there are a lot of questions already answered. In case you're in doubt, all those questions are done by the Data Protection Authority. Again, really compliments to the authority, which has done a great job in at least documenting their decision very well. Whether you like it or not, that's a different story, but at least the Data Protection Authority has done a good job in documenting it.
So how does it compare to the Q&A that CNIL has issued?
Yes, I think also Aurélie will dive into that. So in June, July, CNIL, which stands for the French Data Protection Authority, has issued a lot of information, those days only in French. And they have come up the first time with the term proxy server, that the proxy server will solve it. And in fact, the Danish Data Protection Authority is referring a lot to what has been written by the French Data Protection Authority. So this is also kind of addressing one of the questions we already have heard from you, Mira. So it's a European law. It's regional, controlled by data protection authorities. It's the first stop shop principle. So Danish companies are controlled by the Danish agency, Belgium by the Belgium, French by the French. Also here, Aurélie can explain more. Aurélie is working for 20 years now in this field, and for her, it's something I'm really excited that she's also in the call, and she will explain her view on that.
So yes, and without further ado, I invite Aurélie to talk about European perspective and what does it mean on the larger scale. What is the big picture, Aurélie?
Sure. So I'm happy to do that. Can you see my slide? Did that work?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. Let me put this in presentation mode as well. So basically, we are all talking about this ruling by the European Court of Justice that was issued back in July of 2022, called Schrems 2, which invalidated the framework for allowing to transfer data to the United States, called Privacy Shield. This is not the first time. We used to have Safe Harbor, then we had Privacy Shield, and today we are talking potentially about a transatlantic data privacy framework. So this is basically what we are talking about. It's giving a lot of headaches by a lot of people, for a lot of people, but I mean, it's about collaborating and making sure we actually evolve. I think what's important to understand is that certainly when we talk here about cookies, and I'm really happy that Ulrich started talking about server data as well, because this is going to be like a big question moving forward, is that we're talking here about certainly e-privacy as well, and trying to understand who is responsible when it comes to e-privacy, which is still a directive. And so it means that it's kind of a challenge between the GDPR and e-privacy, which is still a directive, to really understand who is competent here. And this is why so many supervisory authorities are coming out with kind of the alignment that we're seeing, and that was reinforced certainly by the Danish supervisory authority. But it's rather specific, certainly when we talk about e-privacy. And so this is not just about web analytics, this lack of alignment and the fact that, you know, it's not a one-stop shop discussion that is coming. Like, for example, I know the fine that came from the Irish Data Protection Authority around WhatsApp. One-stop shop doesn't apply to e-privacy for the moment. But what I really wanted to highlight here is when it comes to e-privacy, it's not just about web analytics or Google Analytics. We're not out here to put a discipline out of work. This is not about a vendor, but it's really important to understand, and this is an example about, for example, cookie walls. There was an interesting white paper about this and the position of the European Data Protection Board, the different supervisory authorities, and the fact that they don't align. So this is not unheard of. The main question will be how e-privacy will move forward. Is it a regulation, or are we going to talk about potentially having the Digital Services Act helping there with the Commission and things like that? So we're still kind of in limbo with respect to this, and I just wanted to highlight this idea that it's not about web analytics, it's not about just one vendor. It's also not a personal vendetta from very bad people at none of your business. You might have heard about them as well. And it's interesting to start embracing also this idea that there are issues, we need to fix them, and let's work together to make sure that we fix them in the interest of the community, which is the vendors, obviously, the data controllers, so the customers Ulrich has, and also the data subjects. And in that sense, I think we can also use technology to support certainly these compliance obligations, and we're seeing NOI do that as well. So we might as well start thinking about it as well, use technology to support these compliance obligations. What's happening here is really specifically on international data transfers. So as Ulrich mentioned as well, this idea of IDs being passed on, IP addresses, this invalidation of Privacy Shield back in 2020, so more than 2 years ago. And the fact also that following a ruling around Facebook, standard contractual clauses can't be used for companies that are subject to FISA. And well, there's probably a bit more with Google Analytics as well, but let's try to address one issue at a time. But in the end, this is also not totally new, and it's really about making sure we move forward with respect to international data transfers, because at the end, the GDPR is about this fundamental right to privacy being respected wherever the data goes, and the idea that, well, this right should go with the data. And if it doesn't, because there are certain laws in certain countries and the data goes towards a certain country, this needs to be respected, and we need to find solutions to make this work. So how did we get there? It's a long story. As Klaus mentioned, I've been in here for the last 20 years. So for me, this is not new. There's a very good book I recommend. The last chapter, chapter 7, is about Google Analytics and Google, and how this stance about not being evil has evolved with time, for better or for worse. And now we need to make sure that we all collaborate and go in the same direction. We started here, and I certainly did 20 years ago when Google Analytics came out, as one of the first consultancies in Europe, this idea that we wanted data to support decision making and not go follow the highest paid person's opinion. It's a great tool. I totally agree with Klaus. And again, it's not about the tool, it's about making sure we all go towards the same direction. There's more to the market than this. So maybe going beyond this, what we're seeing also is these discussions about exchanging unique IDs between different companies, clean rooms, discussions like this. This will also be challenged at some point. So be aware of the fact that we need to address international data transfers today, but there's certainly more to the GDPR while we figure out e-privacy as well. What does compliance with e-privacy look like? Well, as Mira mentioned, I'm part of the European Center for Privacy and Cybersecurity. We teach there. We teach certainly DPOs, but also people specialized in privacy to make sure that they're as compliant as possible with e-privacy. So this is a plan to make sure that you go in the right direction, knowing what you have, making sure you have the right contracts in place. And this is what the problem is today, is that these contracts for international data transfers for Google are not in line with recent decisions of the European Court of Justice. Consent management platforms are a solution to start making sure that certainly if you're not server-side yet, you go in the right direction, ask for consent. I would like to remind everybody as well that a consent management platform processes personal data and therefore needs also a data protection agreement. And so make sure that basically you go through these projects and align with the requirements. The Danes are talking about CNIL, absolutely, and they're both going in the same direction. IP addresses were initially the biggest problem, and there's a lot of information out there to make sure that you're as compliant as possible. Where are the risks and the responsibilities? Going beyond the borders of Europe, I'd like to also point out to an unlucky company called Sephora, you might have heard about. They were asked by CNIL to remove their Google Analytics tags. They also entered into a settlement in France with respect to the fact that they're not totally compliant with CCPA in California. So a lot of discussions about other signals as well that companies will have to pick up, like the global privacy control. Make sure you keep your risk under control, so get advice from companies that understand what they're doing. Make sure you get your own risk under control, understand your obligations and your limitations, and make sure that you find the right partner for your data stack today, but also for tomorrow. So make sure that these international data transfers are under control, because I think there's a high probability there might be a Schrems 3. And so we need to start thinking about what this means with respect to where the data is and how proxy servers are going to be used. Last but not least, there's more discussions about certainly digital data advertising. So this is an example of other types of consent management that we might all have seen. They are currently being challenged, certainly in Belgium as well. So you might have been through all these consent checkboxes. I tend to click on them. And the question is, do you really think this is in line with well-balanced choices for users? I leave that up to you. There's still a lot of challenges with respect to that. But keep your head above the water by listening to the companies that know what they're doing, understanding and reaching out also to your data protection officer, your privacy counsel, to try to find the right solution and the right balance for you today, but also for the future. Thank you. This is what I wanted to share. I hope this makes sense. Back to you, Mira.
Thank you, Aurélie. I really like the part where you give practical recommendations, and I think it's very important to keep this in mind, that it's not a dead-end situation. There are things you can actually do in order to comply, and there are pretty clear steps that you can take in order to take compliance under your control. There is one question that came that could be interesting to discussed, and I think and it is specifically addressed to you. It is about the future without third-party cookies, and actually the question sounds as follows. What is your point of view about the third-party cookies? Will it also be banned since it is being used for the same purpose as Google Analytics? So I think the question is twofold. One is whether we can expect the future without third-party cookies for real, and whether at some point the regulation will be so that it will not allow anymore the third-party cookie use. So kind of, will it concern all third-party tools that provide third-party cookie tracking?
Aurélie, what's your point? What's your view on that?
It's a broad question because it addresses different issues. So we are talking here about international data transfers. So that's like one problem, IP addresses being sent and things like that. Third-party cookies have other issues as well related to, first of all, lawfulness of the use of this data, and then the abidance with respect to e-privacy. I know a lot of companies are starting to talk about server-side tagging as well. And the main questions that we're basically seeing today is also whether e-privacy will apply to server-side tagging or not. And I think generally speaking, we are going towards that direction. E-privacy will probably apply. which means that even if you use server-side tagging, you're not reading or writing on the device of an individual, you'll still have to ask for consent. And so this is something I think the market will have to understand until supervisory authorities start asking the right questions. Because the problem with server-side tagging is that you basically can't see what's going on. It's server-side. So how do you enforce that is a big question. We're not there yet, but I think this is where the supervisory authorities are certainly going towards.
Yeah, I agree with you, Orly. I think the problem in general is not whether you are using the third-party cookie or a first-party cookie, is that the issue of control, who is controlling and who is owning the data and what is actually happening to the data, and whether or not the end users can be guaranteed a certain level of protection of their data.
Yeah. And just an additional aspect, I mean, Ulrich, you know, you're also representing the engineering part, the technology here. I think you could add that Safari and Firefox anyway have decided to ban third-party cookies already for a while, right?
Yes, I think third-party cookies is on a rapidly descending slope into oblivion, because all the different platforms that you use cookies on are actually disallowing third-party cookies. The biggest problem is Google, of course, who live off a lot of their revenue is generated off third-party cookies. And they're trying to devise all these different solutions, if it's Google Signals or if it's what we call Google Flock, Federated Learning of Cohorts, which is now replaced by a different solution. They want to replace it because they can see that it is an inherent problem in the system that does not solve itself in terms of privacy. But one thing that I think is very important to underline also here is that for all the companies who are looking into the solution or how to solve this, you really need to think of this in two perspectives. First of all, it's the same for everyone, which means that it is not as much as a challenge as it is an opportunity for everyone. Because it's, I kind of compare it to like a Formula One pit stop, where the people who are far behind, they are suddenly caught up and get close to the ones who are in front of them. And in here, we have all the people who are using data and technology in one way, who are now going to use it in a different way altogether. So it's kind of like collecting all the cars behind the safety car here in terms of data, what we're doing here. So everybody has an opportunity to get up to speed. So because everybody is competing on the same conditions, this is an opportunity. The second thing that I think is something that really companies are totally overlooking is instead of trying to cheat your way to get consent and use all these forms and all these ways to try and make people click something that they don't really want to click if they knew the implications, companies should try to build solutions that will actually benefit consumers using their consent. So that instead of trying to trick them into getting false advertising for products they've already said no to, build a solution that will help them decide what products they should get and maybe evaluate what kind of solutions or services that they should select by saying we have a solution for you, and it requires us to set some cookies and understand what you're doing, but in return you get this wonderful solution that will help you in your daily work. And it goes all the way down to the consent form. I haven't seen a good consent form yet in my life. I've only seen companies who try to do this whack-a-mole kind of thing where you have to click the button before it moves itself. And in reality, just working with the consent form and how to present it as an option for the consumer rather as a way to trick them into clicking is something that can dramatically increase the effectiveness of the way you use data. So yes, third-party cookies will die. You should see it as an opportunity and try and think outside the box, and instead of seeing as a negative thing, think how can we build solutions that will help customers with data rather than against them.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Ulrich. I think it's time to talk about why Danish authority is pointing to a proxy as a solution, possible solution to international data transfer challenge, and what does it mean? How does it work? How do proxies work as a solution? And Klaus, what do we need to know about proxy solutions?
Yeah, I mean, we have plans to do a kind of an education. Of course, not everyone has the same status here. So first of all, the data collection challenge based on having consent is, of course, regulated by the GDPR and e-privacy. E-privacy is more local because it's not yet a guideline in Europe. GDPR is the guideline. Then we have the technical paradigm shift towards first-party data collection, and we also have the data quality, which is impacted by browser specifications, tracking preventions, and so on. So if you're a data-driven company, if you want to make data-driven decisions, you have to solve all those three pillars. And the proxy server solution can help you to comply with that. And the paradigm shift I'd like to point out, very simple, is the client-side tracking, which we are used for at least past 15 years, which was so easy. And even when I worked at Google, my clients were asking, so what about Google Analytics Tag Manager and so on? And I was at, yeah, just make sure you get the JavaScript on your website and we do the rest. And in fact, what client-side tracking, and that's the old technology, has always done is you implemented it on your website, the user was loading it in the browser, it was executed in the browser, and it was sent directly from the browser to Google, to Facebook, to TikTok, you name them all. So the user is sending the data, and you can see immediately it's not good because the company doesn't have the control, not the data sovereignty over the data. While with a proxy solution, a server-side tracking solution, we just can turn the data flow around. So you also implement something on your website, which is sent then also a JavaScript to the browser, but it's just one JavaScript. And this single JavaScript sends the data back to the proxy server, and from there, the data is sent. And that means that you have the data sovereignty, you have the data control, and you can manipulate the data, you can pseudonymize the data as the data protection authorities want you to do so. And that's only possible if you're sitting yourself in the data flow. If the user sends the data, then you cannot really impact, you cannot control what kind of data is sent. So that's very important to understand what's the key differentiator between the old technology and the new technology. And what CNIL has pointed out, and the Danish Data Protection Authority, is those supplementary measures. There are 8 points, 7 plus 1, you need to consider in order to forward real pseudonymized data where singling out is not possible. And let's start with the first one as a real example. We all know an IP address is needed to show if you want to send data. So if there's client-side tracking, the user always has to send the IP address. And I think there is a clear justification that an IP address is a personal information. Therefore, client-side tracking ultimately always will struggle to be compliant when it comes to GDPR. So a proxy server, a supplementary measure, needs to be able to change the IP address of the user before sending it. And what is also very important is that you still should get some geo information in the IP address. So the way we do it, for example, is we put last octet, the last 3 numbers of the IP address always to 001, which still enables you to know whether this person is coming from Munich, whether the person is coming from Copenhagen, and so on, which is good for marketing purpose, but no singling out anymore. And then it's not just the IP address. There are a lot of other identifiers, a lot of other ways of fingerprinting and so on, which you need to avoid. So the JavaScript of Google Analytics must not run on the device of the user, because else other ways would enable Google, but we also said other companies. It's not just Google. Let us not forget, Google Analytics is of course the biggest out there, but it's also about other IDs from other vendors. And so step by step, we need to change the data set before forwarding it. And it either can be super complicated or it can be super easy. What I want to share with you here is that if you click once, if you send us an email to proxy@gentis.com, we will share the paper with you where we can explain how you can manipulate data point by data point in order to be compliant. So the choice companies have in Denmark, but also in other countries in the European Union, is either to switch completely to a pure European marketing stack. I mean, that's not bad. CNIL is also referring to tools which are really running purely within Europe, while we believe that there is no way not using Google search, advertising, the display network, Facebook, social media. Europe is not strong in providing a great reach in search and social. So we believe that it's still mandatory to work together with American, with Chinese companies, but to use a proxy, and either you use a proxy as a do-it-yourself solution, or you just use it as a software as a service. And what we have prepared for you here for this webinar is that we have just tried to say proxy isn't equal to proxy. So there are at least two opposing ways of doing a proxy server. One is that you go to your IT department and they will for sure tell you, I can build that for you. And they can build it for Google Analytics. The next tool, they have to build it again. So they have to build a proxy more or less tool by tool. And for GA4, it's even not confirmed that the proxy can work in the do-it-yourself approach. It's a simple solution for the IP address issue. It's a lot of manual work because you configure each stream to be changed. The costs are lower, that's for sure, and that's what the IT department will, of course, promise to you. To be frank, that only works with a clear API documentation. If you build it yourself, there will be regular updates, so it's not done once. You have to run it 7x24, and there are constantly updates in the pixel, which you always have to do. So even if it's working for the first 2 months, that doesn't mean that it will run again. And you have these peak days of Black Friday and so on. No graphical user interface, no easy configuration, no tag management for the build-yourself in-house solution. While a complete professional software as a service is providing the solution not just for one pixel, but for many, many pixels out there. Gentis, for example, is providing 80 pixels right now, handling about automatic updates, no manual work needed, fully managed. The costs are higher for sure, but the total cost of ownership will be lower at the end of the day. We do not need any API documentation ourselves because we have a different technology in place. No update costs for if pixels are changing, a graphic user interface with easy configuration, and also a tag management solution included. So that's how we want to distinguish those two solutions. We want you to better understand proxy isn't equal to proxy, and it always depends on who you ask, what kind of solution is recommended. That's how the world works. If you ask 3 people, you get 3 opinions. But what we wanted to make sure is that you're aware that the total cost of ownership might differ then at the end of the day than what a person has told you at the beginning. Good.
So thank you, Klaus. That was really, I mean, even I learned something new. Yeah, that's a really good overview. And I think it's also important to underline that if you're using proxy solution with a software as a service provider, it should be important to use the one who is based in Europe, because right now there is a, you know, in the supply chain of data transfer mechanism, it is one aspect to be considered. And I'm just anticipating the question of one of our audience members about the cloud. And I would like to address it to Ulrich, Aurelie, and Klaus. What is your position on how do you assess the risk connected to clouds based on the American based servers, and what is the risk of, we all know that the risk-based approach has been rejected by data protection authorities, and how do you make sure that the data transfer that you are conducting as a company is not under risk to be subject to Cloud Act and FISA?
Aurélie, do you want to take the question first? Because I think that's where you can play all your experience here.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, cloud is obviously one of the big questions out there, where we all realize that there is no infrastructure in Europe. So we are, talking about the main market players, whether it's AWS, Azure, or even Google Cloud. So the objective of the GDPR has never been to stop data flows. The idea is really about making sure fundamental rights are respected. And I know the authorities have announced that they're going to look at clouds and look at further requirements. So I expect that within 6 months, something like that, to get an idea. What was clear is that cloud certainly has localization in place for many years, and I know also as DPO for mParticle, localization was kind of an obvious one, and we were already building that before the invalidation of Privacy Shield. Whether that is enough, no, I don't think so. Certainly when we're thinking about, as you said, Mira, the issue with FISA on the side of the United States, if data goes there, the issue with the Data Cloud Act, if data is in Europe and then there is the possibility of requesting data even though it's not on US soil. So I think this is still a discussion that needs to continue, and where companies need to make sure that the cloud service providers that they use have the right contractual agreements in place. After all, they act as typically sub-processors to vendors or processors to data controllers, and also making sure that they have the technical settings in place, security measures as well. And this is what we're seeing certainly from a contractual perspective, is more and more questions about that, questions about transfer impact assessments. So it's a mix of two. As always, it's about the contractual reassurances, and then it's about the technical and security measures that go together with it. So we'll have to see how this works, but I do not imagine data flows being cut for certainly cloud service providers. Facebook, that's another question altogether. So that would be interesting from an engineering perspective as well. But we need, to keep an eye on it to make sure that this goes in the right direction, because there's no alternative in Europe, basically. So this is what I think. I don't know what you guys think, Ulrich or Klaus.
Ulrich, maybe first?
Yes, I can certainly comment on what people are doing. And Google is providing a solution for companies on the Google Cloud that is very easy to implement in terms of server-side tracking to solve some of these issues. Not that it's fully a replacement for any kind of third-party solutions, but it seems to be, if you want to build your own solution, the easiest way to do it is on Google Cloud. The problem is, of course, that a lot of companies haven't really taken into consideration that Google Cloud, whether the servers are in Europe or in the US, are still owned by a US company, and access to that data set. I don't think that neither the CIA or the FBI or any other authority really cares if a US company has a server in Europe or a server in the US when they want to access the data. So I think that when the investigations into what cloud means comes further, my prediction is that it has nothing to do with whether the server is on the US soil or the EU soil, but also if there is access to that data from a company based in the US. And that discussion is going to be very interesting to follow. So when building a server-side solution, I think one should be very careful about evaluating what implications it has, even if you choose the most simple solution, because it is very obvious for companies to say, oh, I heard that Google Cloud has the obvious environment for us to do this in. But legally, you have to really be careful, because we don't know what the data legislation authorities have to say about storing that data in Google's data servers that you cannot send to Google in the first place. So there's kind of that duality in the question.
One comment and one conclusion out of that from my point. Cloud, as I've learned, stands for clarify lawful overseas use of data. That explains what the Cloud Act is. So they define by law that they can access servers overseas. From the American perspective, that's probably European servers. So it's defined by the law that they can access those servers. And here comes the problem. So cloud is not a cloud, it's clarify lawful overseas use of data. The conclusion out of that for us was, for example, that we solely use European clouds for processing the data before we can forward it to anyone, before our clients can forward it to Google. So we are using one cloud, which is an Austrian Swiss cloud, Exascale, and one is a German cloud, Ionos, and we are partially also using OVH from France. So we are dedicated and committed to have this first step of data processing fully under control, full data sovereignty, while we also want to connect to the US. Of course, as Aurélie said, we do not want to stop the data flow completely. That would be just, you know, I mean, I'm even not commenting on people who say we can do everything ourselves, because then the question is, which computer are you using? I mean, we have just American-built hardware in this video conference right now. We are using video conferencing system tools from the US. I mean, it's not realistic that we can shut down, not at all. But it's good if we define the rules to a certain extent.
Yeah, I'd like to comment on that as well. It's the objective is not autarky or balkanization of data, and we need to find a way to work globally and make sure that, you know, these data flows internationally. Mira mentioned also India and China and other countries. I know that we've been looking at standard contractual clauses for Latin America to understand, okay, from a contractual perspective, what do we need? China came out with their privacy law as well, PIPL, which is pretty close to the GDPR with some very specific Chinese caveats, but it does mean that the data can flow in and out of China as well. And so this is what I think the internet was built around, the idea of free flow of data. This is also what the European Union is about, free flow of persons, goods, and information. But we need to make sure that certain fundamental rights that are part of our societies are protected and go with the data as well. So it's an international conversation that needs to keep going, and then that we need to translate from a technical perspective. And this is where the conundrum lies, and the biggest challenge, I think, lies is this collaboration between the two parties.
Definitely, and you anticipated my next question, Aurélie, because this is what I was actually going to ask the panel, you, Ulrich and Klaus, because the problematic of international data transfer does not lie only between the US and the EU. It's just like you rightfully mentioned and correctly, the internet is built around the idea of connecting the whole world with a network, and the data flows nowadays globally, and now there are a lot of companies, not only in the US, that are having a very big influence on the world economy, like just look at TikTok, for example. And how do companies that work from the jurisdiction where GDPR and e-privacy are applicable, how do they anticipate this potential risks with international data flows? What are the recommendations? Maybe Ulrich can start. What do you recommend to your customers? How do you approach this in a more holistic and global way?
Well, it really depends a lot upon the customer, of course, and what kind of interaction flow they have. For the more hardcore retailers out there, there is a lot of interactions measured and a lot of channels, and as such, you have to take rigorous evaluation of each of the data flows that you have and evaluate if they are truly necessary for your business to succeed, or it's just a nice to have setup. So I think you have to be very rigorous around the complexity of maintaining data flows in the future and seeing how that works. For companies who do not have that reliability on the very specific data flows, it's more like setting a standard for the different departments around the world, saying, how do we go about using data and what are the restrictions of using data that you can have to apply your business within. So instead of looking at it from the other side, that we are already using a lot of data and now we have to restrict ourselves, it's setting the boundary, saying this is what falls within the guidelines that we set as a company, where we then comply with what we need in order to drive our business. But I also think it's about customer relationships. So I also think we recommend customers to say, you should really work hard on getting a better relationship with your customers, so that they will allow you to send them direct communication, and you rely less on these identifiers of anonymity that people arrive with on their website. So if you know who people are and you can get them to identify themselves, then you can maybe get a more natural and healthy relationship with your customers, instead of trying to track them behind their back. So that's those kinds of things, I think, is the kind of conversations we have with our customers. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you, Ulrich. What is your intake, Orly? And just very briefly, because we're now a little bit running out of time.
Yeah, so briefly, certainly as a European working for the Commission on different aspects, I favor adequacy countries. So countries where data can flow freely between Europe and that specific country, and where that list has grown. So Japan, South Korea, and APAC, for example, Argentina, Uruguay. And certainly for companies like Mpartico as a CDP, where do we set up our support teams? Where are our customers, and where are our sub-processors, and what these data flows are? As Ulrich said, it's like, it's not just about our customers, it's not just about us, it's about how we support, and it's also about where their markets are. So it's like a four-dimensional puzzle that will have consequences, and trying to make this as simple as possible from a contractual perspective is going towards adequacy countries, as defined by the European Commission for the moment. That's at least my simplified strategy.
Thank you very much, Orly. As we are approaching the end of our today's webinar, I just want to maybe Klaus, maybe you can give us what are your three main takeaways you want the audience to finish this webinar?
I'd like to pick up what Ulrich said at the beginning. It's an opportunity, it's a chance. It's not just an obstacle, something really bad. We have seen that companies are getting better data if they can control their data, if they have data sovereignty. Second, start with a parallel setup would be my advice. Don't wait, put it into the budget for next year. Don't be blindfolded, just it won't go away. Privacy will stay. And see it really as a chance and not a threat. That's something I would advise people to have as a key takeaway here. There are solutions out there. There are also smart European companies who can help. So it's not just always American software which can solve problems. We also have smart engineers in Europe.
Thank you, Klaus. Well, just as anticipated in the beginning, this hour went by so fast. We have a couple of pending questions, but unfortunately we don't have time to address them. But I think we already addressed a lot of the questions from the audience, and I really thank the audience for being so active today. If we can answer or address more questions or comments, I invite you all to write us. proxy@gentis.com, or to me personally, mira@gentis.com, and we will just address any open questions. At this point, I would like to thank the audience, first of all, the speakers. Thank you so much, Ulrich, Aurélie, Klaus, for being here today and really taking the time for today's webinar. I think it was very important and very useful. And of course, I want to thank the people who helped to organize this webinar. And I hope to see everyone in our next event. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.